Our committee of the whole to order and welcome the county commissioners. Thank you for being here. I appreciate these opportunities when we have a chance to get together. We have, first item is roll. All council members are here with the exception of Miss West, I believe. So, and Stacey Anderson, Miss West and Miss Anderson. We have minutes to approve from April 11th, 2 different meetings. Are there any changes to those minutes? Seeing none, those will stand approved. Is there any public comment on non-agenda items? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Cares, who put the referral in for the meeting. Thanks.
Thanks. Last the county commissioners and city council got together was April 2017. So here we are 1 year later, having a dedicated meeting. I worked with Commissioner Strohmeyer to put this together. Thank you, Dave, for your help and initiative. As you can see in the referral, we have 2 dedicated presentation and discussion items. Those are the Jail Diversion Master Plan update and the Community Wildfire Protection Plan. We also have a list of other things that may be discussed more generally if time allows. As you all know, this is scheduled to be up to 2 hours. So I would like to move in the Jail Diversion Master Plan update unless Mr. Strohmeyer has any opening comments.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for the opportunity to meet jointly. As many of you probably know, or maybe you don't know, the county commissioners meet with the mayor, Missoula's chief executive, on a monthly basis. And it's only appropriate that at least on a periodic basis we meet with the city's legislative branch of government also, since the Board of County Commissioners wear 2 hats, both legislative and executive. It's great to be here with you all today.
So then the first item, Jail Diversion Master Plan, Commissioner Rowley and I will approach the bench, and Ms. Rowley will begin and give the majority of the discussion with assistance from various others. So thank you for your attention. And I think that we're willing to entertain questions as we go. Do you agree? Yeah, we are. So leave it to the chair, Mr. Van Lasberg, to assist us with that. Thanks. Is this on?
Thank you for having us. Really appreciate it, and we appreciate the opportunity to share kind of the work that we've been doing on the Jail Diversion Master Plan. Before I start, really quickly, I'll show you where you can find this information. You just go to missoulacounty.us. If you go to Government and then click on Jail Diversion Efforts, you will, is it just not close enough?
I don't know.
May just need to pull it closer.
Okay, sorry. And then you can scroll down, and there you can read the entirety of the Jail Diversion Master Plan and other things we'll be talking about today. If you're confused about the target population for the Jail Diversion Master Plan, there is a list of charges that were included in it down here, the total list of non-assaultive offenses that were included, and just kind of a whole history there. So I want to show you that in case you really get excited and want to go do some more research. But probably not. And I really appreciate, I want to pre-thank everybody who's going to come up and talk today. This has been a really big collaborative effort with a lot of people, a lot of different electeds, a lot of different staff. And so I think it is good to ask questions as we go, since they'll kind of be parading up and back for their different portions of the presentation. And we're actually going to start with Sheriff McDermott coming up and telling you a bit about the Missoula County Detention Facility.
All right, well, good morning, and thank you for letting me be here today to speak with you. It's an exciting plan, and it's really exciting to see city and county leadership come together and provide an opportunity for us to give an update on the facility. One of the biggest challenges I had upon taking office was to take a look at the issue of jail overcrowding in our current facility that had been chronically overcrowded for at least the last 5 years, and then, of course, prior to that as well. And it was a great opportunity to work with the commission, to work with other city leaders, and commission a panel of elected officials, stakeholders to bring forward a plan for our community but to really take an opportunity to look at the people that are inside of the facility and the data. And what we discovered is there is a significant portion of the inmates that are technically nonviolent, non-dangerous. They suffer from substance abuse issues, alcohol issues, and worse yet, mental illnesses, and find themselves in our facility. So I'm super, super proud of this plan. Go to the next slide. The part that I wanted to talk about today was, our facility holds approximately 400 people, male, females, and it holds federal, state, city, county, and juveniles as well. There's a juvenile unit. But today, for this plan, when we focus on our jail diversion, we're talking about the county side, or the county beds that are available. And there's about 224 of those. About 4 dozen of those are women cells. We do have the ability for 16 maximum security beds, and then we have special classification, 16 cells as well, and that's truly right now serving our sex offender population, separating them for their safety in a specific pod. And then the neat thing about our facility is it is an assessment center. It is the Missoula Assessment Sanction Center, so the state contracts with us, and there's inmates that truly are in Missoula to process and ship out to these treatment programs and programs to get their life moving forward. At the bottom there, we talk about the average daily rate in 2017 being 223 for county beds, so almost full capacity. And the goal that we like to have for classification systems to work in our facility, to be able to separate individuals and classify them based on their needs, is to operate around that 80 to 90% range to be able to do that, and that's been a little bit of a challenge for us. One of the things that we did initially after the plan was adopted by the City of Missoula and the Board of County Commissioners is we created a lieutenant's position at the facility and an administrative position that specifically was responsible for reviewing the daily inmate population, identifying people that were low risk, nonviolent, non-dangerous, people with the substance abuse issues and mental health challenges, and to work with the courts, the prosecutors, defense attorneys, and other community stakeholders to divert these people from jail and into treatment or other supervision programs and outside of a jail setting, which has been super successful. Originally, that position was filled by our Assistant Commander Cheryl Ziegler, who's going to speak a little later. And then right now, hopefully many of you have met Lieutenant Alex Hall. And she does an amazing job for us at the facility and has been working very hard on this. So this slide is an email from Alex, who's away in Helena at a leadership training today, otherwise she'd be here. And it's just kind of a rundown of the population in the facility. And it's a good slide because it gives you an idea of, what a day looks like out in the facility. And anyway, it has a good breakdown as far as what the holds are. And so there's district court holds and felony holds. At least for this capture was 59%. There's DOC inmates, which are really inmates that we're holding just waiting for the state to come pick up and clear out. There's municipal court holds, and those are folks with specifically municipal court charges, as well as justice court holds, misdemeanors. And then we hold fugitives and some inmates as well. But this is the area in the facility where we are focusing our jail diversion efforts on to treat these folks. So.
Good morning. I'm Landy Holloway, Justice of the Peace. I would like to just comment a little bit on the Jail Diversion Master Plan. When it became a plan and it started, I was on the steering committee and I worked with the Department of Corrections, focusing on the prison population and reentry and who's going where with the felonies with the state. And so when I became a Justice of the Peace, I felt it was really important to understand the numbers because when the plan was developed, the data hadn't been there to really understand who was incarcerated. And I think if you take a look at nationally what's happening, there is the ACLU studies, there's called mass incarceration, there's the Jim Crow books, and there's a lot of focus on over-incarceration in our country. And who is that? Who is incarcerated? And part of what we needed to do is to truly understand what our issue was in Missoula community. And so when I became a Justice of the Peace and really worked at saying, what are the numbers? Where are they coming for? Because I felt an obligation to understand that if my court was incarcerating people, are we doing it effectively? Are we doing it with purpose and intent and for the right reasons? And so what we began to see are some of these numbers on the bottom part of that screen. And I think that when you take a look at those numbers, you're going to see that it is not your misdemeanor offenses that are appearing in justice court or appearing in municipal court. I think that's an assumption that's made nationally, and so now when we start taking a look at what really is the issue in Missoula community, and you take a look at that 59% of our population are district court or felony holds. Those are people who have been committed to the Department of Corrections or pending charges on a felony, pre-conviction. They could be post-conviction on a probation violation put in there by either a warrant or a probation officer. Then you go down to the second number of 17%, and again, the date on these stats are from April 3rd, 2018. So, and these are not unique to what we see on a regular weekly basis. So going down to the 31, the 17.5% DOC inmates, DOC Department of Corrections, probation violation, they could be parole holds, or they could be conditional release violations, or maybe somebody out of the pre-release. So those are pending processing or movement with the Department of Corrections or hearings. Those numbers have decreased drastically with some of the changes that the Department of Corrections has made in the last year. Federal inmates, those are federal inmates. They have federal holds. We don't have control over them as a Missoula community. However, that is a funding source for the jail as well. Municipal court holds 6%. Justice court, we have 4 people in it that day, 2%. Those are remarkably low numbers given our population and given the numbers of convictions and holds that we have on those individuals. How somebody gets to jail on those charges, they could be a warrant on a failure to appear. It could be a probation violation for misdemeanor probation. It could be a part of a sentence. Your last legislature changed a lot of the sentences for misdemeanors and took away some of the mandatory sentencing. I can tell you that across the state, the Court of Limited Jurisdiction judges were not real happy with that, because we think of that as a tool, because the lower courts, that's where a lot of your population begins their interaction with the criminal justice system. So we wanted some of those tools. But I really want you to take a look at what those numbers are. 6% and 2% out of municipal court and justice court. Those are not the misdemeanors that are being, a lot of times people have additional felony holds there. Questions: do people get in jail for failure to pay on a $20 seatbelt ticket? Yeah. They do on occasion. If they never appear, that's only one of our recourses that we have with the courts. We can't just let those go away. And I like to bring that up because I think that's just a reality of the criminal justice system. We don't just get to, or the justice system get to dismiss those. Failure to pay, sometimes we do have people who end up in jail on warrants for failure to pay. All of the courts attempt to work with people. We can use collections, we can use a variety of other suspending driver's licenses or bench warrants, but it's up to that judicial officer to decide how they want to use those. And there are a lot of pros and cons to each one of those, of what kind of never-ending cycle or the revolving door that people get involved with. So the last number on there, 4% inmates held for fugitive out-of-county holds. Those are warrants from other jurisdictions that are arrested in our community or maybe transporting from one area to another. So really taking a look at, that's how people get into our jail. And so when we take a look at the Jail Diversion Master Plan, I think we have to take a look at what numbers do we really have any control or focus on. So I'm going to step away. Somebody else is going to come up, but thank you.
Before we transition, I just want to underscore, so this is obviously snapshot data for April 3rd. But the representation is, this is representative of sort of any time during the year.
Yes, I've never seen anything drastic over the
Okay.
past year and a half watching this.
Commissioner Stromeyer?
Yeah, Landy. So, how do the DOC inmates with no local holds differ from mask inmates? What's the difference between the two?
Well, things have changed since I've been there for a couple of years, but most DOC holds are maybe there's a probation violation. It could be a 72-hour investigative hold on a charge. It could be pending a hearing where the Department of Corrections comes in and then deals with that individual, and then they return to the community or they move on to another facility. Any other questions?
Mr. DeBarry?
Thanks for sharing the breakdown here. So just for my benefit, maybe for others as well, I mean, it seems like only a small percentage of the folks that are in our jail are there because of adjudication for things happening locally. But what level of control do we have to say, address things like the 111 or the 31 or the 22? Do we have the ability to say we can't hold those folks because we don't have space, or what level of discretion is there with regard to folks that aren't in our jail because of what's happening, because of things that are taking place locally?
I would have to let Sheriff McDermott answer that question.
So really, when we have a arrest warrant or a judge's order to incarcerate someone, we have to do it. I mean, it's a legal order, and we're required to house that person, and that's really where the challenge comes in. And I think that's really where the collaboration and the leadership between city, county leaders, the judges have taken and played a big part in this. But we've worked real hard to have good communication in specific to municipal court. And other courts, and so far it's worked. It hasn't been bad. There's been times when we've had to reach out to the courts and have people removed that were on holds for whatever reason that we just simply didn't have space for, or sometimes they had special needs. In situations where someone in a wheelchair, someone who's 7 months pregnant, may get picked up on a commitment or a hold order, and so one good thing about bringing all of these people together and some of the work that's been done on this plan is being able to reach out, and if we have buy-in in this plan, then we can have buy-in in trying to work through those issues where legally we're required to hold them, but we also have an open line of communication to the court to get a release order or to divert them to a hospital or some other type of community hold that's more appropriate. So, but it's been difficult, and it's been a challenge, and it just exacerbates the overcrowding issue for us. But good question. Any others? Okay.
Maybe to just expand on a couple of points. One thing that happened in December is the DOC released a bunch of people. There was a legislative mandate from the 2017 legislature because there were so many DOC inmates taking up county beds, and counties were saying, we can't hold your people, we're all overcrowded. So the legislature mandated that they get the statewide population down to, I think, 250? Yes. I believe 250 statewide. And so, as you see, it says we are currently over hard beds and 0 pods, and we only had 187 people in out of 224 on that day. From 2017 it was 223. We were often over 224, and we always were over people in hard beds. And so DOC cleared out a lot of people from that population. But again, that's one way people can get out, but we didn't have control over that. That was either get people out, or the legislature was going to pull, I think, $2 million of funding from DOC. So that helped our population go down quite a bit. And then second, another way to look at the population, I put in the first paragraph of the narrative, you'll see kind of a percentage. So these are snapshots, and then also you have to take into consideration how long are these people staying. And if you look at just the nonviolent misdemeanors, they're only staying 3 days. And so when you get a snapshot, it's 2 to 4% consistently over the 6-month time period of snapshots that we analyzed. because even though they're 30% of the bookings, they're going through so quickly that on any given day, they're going to be a low percentage of the population. And the people that are going to be highly represented are the people who are there for longer periods of time in a snapshot. So that's kind of explains that first paragraph of the narrative. So we already zoomed in, but zooming way out, why are we even looking at this? I think it's everyone kind of knows this. You can't see it very well here, but America is the only one in that really dark color. We incarcerate more people per capita than any country in the world. We don't have higher crime rates, we just incarcerate more people. And so we are considered to have an over-incarceration problem. That's different than overcrowding, which is facility specific. Over-incarceration is more like is also called mass incarceration or inappropriate incarceration. People that maybe should or maybe shouldn't be sitting in jail. America has a significant issue with holding more people in jail than any other country in the world. And so we know this is a problem. It's a national problem and it's a local problem. These are just 3 efforts that we're going to briefly talk about that we've done in the past 3 years to look at our criminal justice system: sequential intercept mapping, Pay for Success project, and the Stepping Up initiative. And we'll kind of bam through them quickly, but I think it's important to know too that the JDMP, while it focused on non-assaultive misdemeanors and felons, and was an interesting target population of its own sort, it wasn't done in a vacuum, and we have kind of put together these other efforts as well. So I think Aaron Kautz will come and talk about sequential intercept mapping.
Hi. Is there a slide for paper for the? Okay. So, do I go forward like this? Yeah. Down? Yeah. Okay. This is a really clear slide. Don't try to read it.
Colors.
So my name's Erin Kautz. I'm a grants administrator for Missoula County. And Missoula County was one of 5 communities nationally to receive a grant award from SAMHSA, which is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. And this was in June of 2015. And the grant was to host a sequential intercept mapping workshop. It was facilitated by the Policy Research Associates. And it was intended to help identify Missoula's early jail diversion efforts, gaps in the system, and help develop a strategic plan for Missoula. And this was kind of, I believe it started right around the beginning of the jail diversion master plan discussions. But because everybody's like, well, what's a sequential intercept mapping? What does this mean? And what it does is, the model provides a conceptual framework for communities to help organize targeted communities with justice-involved individuals with behavioral health and co-occurring disorders. So what we did as a community, I think there was about 25 people there, and we looked at from a very cross-section of criminal justice and mental health and addiction services, and we looked at what are the different intercepts where people can be diverted from the criminal justice system. And so intercept 1 up there is first call to 911. Intercept 2 is initial detention, initial court hearings. Intercept 3 is jails and courts. Intercept 4 is reentry, and intercept 5 is community corrections, community support. There's now actually, since we've done that, they've added an intercept 0, which is even like pre-involvement with courts, and Cola has presented on that, so she knows a lot about it as well. But that's like, what can we do as a community to help intercept people, to help divert them before they even get involved with criminal justice system? And that could mean case management, it could mean all sorts of things. But this really helped get discussions going, it helped make connections for people, and it was just one more step in moving forward towards the jail diversion master plan. Does anybody have any questions about that before I?
Yeah, hang on a second.
Okay.
So Aaron, is it right to think about this in terms of understanding where people touch the system at all these different points so that we can focus on the greatest opportunity to help break the cycle, keep them out of, et cetera, et cetera.
And just to note, this is specifically for people with behavioral health and co-occurring disorders, so people with mental health needs or addiction services needs, things like that. But yeah, this is ways that we can, these are different intercepts or different spots where we can make it. And so this is actually what we currently have up there, and I think it's on the Missoula County website, jail diversion website as well, but these are what we currently have, and then we talked about ways that we can improve that.
Thanks.
as TJ mentioned, he and I took office at the same time, and one of the first things he noticed is, wow, this facility is really overcrowded. And so we partnered and wrote a grant for Pay for Success, which is a financing mechanism where you use private financing to fund a targeted intervention, and then if very specific and robust criteria are met, the government will pay those investors back with interest. So essentially the taxpayers only end up paying for success. We did a year-long feasibility study with a consultant on this. We decided against it, but we really gathered a lot of data. It was very data-centric. And the data didn't show us much. We have too small of a population really for private investors to be interested in because there's not statistical power with the interventions. But what we heard loud and clear from people talking about it was addiction is an issue in our community. And so we had the consultant go in and do this validated Texas Christian University drug screen to look at a snapshot of the inmates that we had on that day. 108 participated, and you can see that 71% identified it as having severe or moderate substance abuse issues. And then you pull out their demographic data, and it was pretty shocking and interesting to me, at least, maybe not to people who work in the system, but how they're unemployed, homeless, the number of children we have that their parents are incarcerated, so these children are in foster homes or staying with someone else, and their prior convictions, 8 on average prior convictions, been in jail a dozen times. Like these are complex people with complex lives and criminal histories, and so it's not an easy puzzle to solve. And as we talked about in the Jail Diversion Master Plan, really the people that are in our jail for the most part aren't in for a few days and cycling through. They're having significant life issues and visiting jail multiple times throughout their lives. And so how can we affect this? Again, look, that's why we're looking at our resources and gaps and sequential intercept mapping and really looking at what can we do about this really complex problem. We also are participants in the National Stepping Up initiative, which is to reduce incarceration of individuals with mental illness. National statistics show that these individuals are 4.5 times more likely to be arrested, 3 times more likely to commit suicide while they're in custody, stay in jail 8 times longer than the general population, have a higher recidivism rate, and obviously cost the system more, the criminal justice system and community systems, support systems when they're out. So we were competitively selected to take a team to Washington, D.C. and spend some time with experts talking about how our community, what we have, and how we could maybe move the needle on these 4 key measures, which you can read up there, as we look to regarding incarceration of the mentally ill, and also these measures can be to any other population that we consider to potentially be inappropriately incarcerated. And then this is just some more background that I'm not going to go into, but it's mentioned. This is what Cynthia, the author of the JDMP, talked about there. And you can see, so we know this is a national issue, and there's been a lot of state and local attention to the issue, but there has been very little, if any, action. And so it's actually very exciting. I'm very excited then that we're here today, because the fact that we had somebody put together an actionable plan, and we're here more than a year later, but still we're here. It's actually a big deal, and it hasn't really been done before. And so I'm very proud that we've made a plan and that we have actually spent some time working on it, and we're happy now to move on to talking about the Jail Diversion Master Plan. I distributed the recommendations yesterday in email. I hope you all have them. If you perused those, the narrative really kind of explains a lot of the things that we've been doing that I also handed out yesterday. But if you're kind of more like me, you want to see which recommendation specifically was addressed and how. And so we are just going to parade people up here and talk specifically about, and if you want to follow the specific recommendations, you'd be welcome to. And we'll start with the Sheriff's Office.
So my name is Cheryl Ziegler, and I am an assistant commander at the Missoula County Detention Facility. And I'm also a law enforcement coordinator for the Crisis Intervention Team, which is one of the recommendations in Jail Diversion Master Plan for additional support. And I'm happy to report we just hosted our 3rd annual Academy of CIT. Some of the faces in the room were present. Thank you, Michelle Cares, and to Dave Strohmeyer. Attended briefly. Albeit the support was super important, so we really appreciate that. Just wanted to give an update on some of the numbers that came out of that. For this academy, which took place April 9th through the 13th, it's a 40-hour academy. that focuses on law enforcement and mental health, doing a better job to divert folks from jail who are suffering from a mental health crisis in our community. It also teaches those two folks, those two groups, really separate groups, how to cooperate, work together for better outcomes for those clients within our community. Jail's not a great option for folks that are in a mental health crisis, but it is often a solution for our law enforcement officers who don't know what else to do or how to better resource these folks. So this training really focuses on that resource piece, teaching folks to de-escalate and understand that they're looking at a mental health crisis and how to better move these people forward rather than just bringing them to jail, which isn't really going to serve their needs particularly well. For this particular academy, the Missoula Police Department had 7 sworn attendees, 1 community officer that attended for a total of 8. The Missoula County Sheriff's Office had 4 sworn deputies, 6 detention officers. Probation and parole for the state sent 5 probation officers, and the University of Montana Police sent 2 sworn. And that's actually their first engagement in CIT, and so it's a really great measure of how we're doing as an academy, and that folks are reaching out from further and further places and want to engage in that because they found that it's been helpful for other officers or other agencies that have engaged. In addition to the law enforcement component of that, we had folks from Missoula Correctional Services, PATH, Western Montana Mental Health, Open Aid Alliance, the Paparello Center. We had a total of 40 participants. 13 of those we consider to be law enforcement officers in the kind of stringent sworn definition of that. 9 mental health, 6 detention, 7 probation, and again, the presence of Councilwoman Cares and Commissioner Strohmeyer. Thank you very much. I think the second recommendation on here that Commissioner Rowley wanted me to address was the access to RX, or to prescriptions and the healthcare and RX. Yeah, that's actually how I say it at the jail too. So access to prescriptions and healthcare navigator, reentry assistance, things that are addressed as a recommendation in jail diversion master plan for how the jail should function moving forward with medical contracts. We did just select a new medical provider. We've been with the same medical provider for the last 5 years, so that went out for RFP this last year. The selection is changing. We have selected Planned Parenthood of Montana to administer our jail services. It's a interesting faces in the room, but really we're pretty excited about it moving forward. They're very connected locally. They service a lot of the same clientele, and so there's a great opportunity for continuity of care in that contract. Their offices are local as opposed to our previous provider who was located in Denver, and so sometimes that corporate feel really just didn't fit with the Missoula community, right? We wanted to be more local and more able to service those folks on reentry and really have a better understanding of the folks that we're servicing and their needs. With that contract comes a navigator position, and made some kind of notes from that vendor contract, which apparently I did not bring. Fantastic. My apologies. So basically, they're going to provide a navigator position that will assist folks in reentry in terms of connecting them with application to Social Security disability. So for folks that are chronically mentally ill and can't get healthcare services or housing or don't have any sort of means of income in community, it can help them moving forward in making sure that their services are continued. So we can set folks up all we want within the jail, get them adequate healthcare. They go out into community, they can't afford their prescriptions, there's no one to help them with that, and we don't necessarily have that outreach piece beyond a 90-day period to really assist with that moving forward. So that'll be amazing for the inmates that we serve in reentry. The other piece to that is that a large percentage of our jail population are folks that are struggling with mental illness, SDMI clients, severe and disabling mental illness. So one of the gaps that we recognized when we went out for RFP on that medical contract is a provider that can address more severe and complex psychiatric disorders for folks that are within our facility. So that contract also includes a position for a psychiatric provider separate from the medical provider who can diagnose and prescribe and help service those folks with complex psychiatric disorders. As much as we'd like to say they're not in our jail, that's where they are. And so we need to meet them where they are and help provide better services. And we believe that Planned Parenthood has a plan together to get that done. So we're excited about that. Amy? Amy? Any questions on that?
Take your seat.
Nope.
Hi, I'm Amy Cheeseborough, the Jail Diversion Program Manager with Western Montana Mental Health Center, and we are located at the Missoula County Detention Facility. So I'll be
Amy,
talking.
Could you just get a little bit closer to the mic, mostly for the TV stuff, so thank you.
Thanks. So I'll be talking about this next point, 3.11, but also really want to mirror what Cheryl was saying about Planned Parenthood. They're also going to be having an expanded formulary as well, so there'll be increased medication options for individuals that find themselves incarcerated. As well, Planned Parenthood is really excited to work more collaboratively with our mental health team at the detention facility. So really developing this more comprehensive team-emphasized treatment plan for folks while they're incarcerated. So I just really want to mirror what Cheryl was saying as far as moving forward with our medical team and with Planned Parenthood. So it's definitely exciting. As far as who we are in the jail diversion mental health program at the detention facility, there's myself. I'm the program manager and the clinician. We have one other clinician who is Hannah Zimmerman. We have a case manager, and then we have a part-time LAC. We also partner with the University of Montana for practicum students that are in the social work program, and they assist a lot with our workload and capacity. So as far as funding goes, funding for my position is currently expired, essentially, with the House Bill 33. And we terminated, well, we had to lay off our case manager effective June 7th, again, just due to funding. So at this point, as we're moving forward, we're really looking at it being myself and then Hannah, who's our other clinician, and then our part-time LAC, who's also grant funded. Services that we provide all of the suicide assessments. So when an individual comes into the facility, and if they're placed on suicide protocol, we are assessing and determining risk for those individuals before they're taken off that status. We identify individuals that may be experiencing severe disabling mental illness while they're incarcerated, and providing wraparound services for them while they're incarcerated. Part of the really cool piece of our case management is we're able to provide 90 days of case management once an individual left the facility, which really has proven to be effective as far as reducing recidivism for folks. So recidivism being that returning to the system over and over again, that revolving door piece. So let's see. So in 2017, our program served 2,380 individuals. Of those, we identified 43% meet the criteria for severe disabling mental illness. So when we go back to that slide where we were really looking at the population of the individuals that are incarcerated, the number one provider of mental health care in the United States is jails, right? So when we're looking at those numbers, the folks that we're talking about are individuals that are experiencing mental illness. Along with that, individuals that experience mental illness are at increased risk of also having substance use and abuse issues. So I just really want to drive home that when we're talking about these numbers, who it is that we're talking about. It's individuals that are experiencing severe mental illness, right? So let's see. Other things that our program has done. Let's see. What do you guys want to know about?
It is the narrative, so your numbers that you sent me are in the narrative.
Perfect. Then I won't go over all of our numbers as you guys have access to that. But definitely I think the numbers do demonstrate the need and the benefits of our program. So
I'd like to understand more explicitly. Was it a case? What was the position you said you're losing as a result of
case management?
Case management.
Yep.
Can you elaborate on the effect that's going to have?
It'll be substantial. At this point in time, the clinicians, myself and our other clinician, we really are doing the one-on-one therapy and the suicide assessments, right? So as case management, really what her role is getting folks connected to those community-based resources, right? So she's helping them fill out those applications, right? She's doing the Medicaid applications with folks while they're incarcerated. She's helping them with housing, getting into treatment, doing the follow-up from our LAC, right, who's only there part-time. So as far as getting the treatment applications for RIMROC, MCDC, and then doing the follow-up, right? It's incredibly time-intensive. As well as that 90 days follow-up in the community, and that piece is imperative for folks in order to have a warm handoff to those community providers, those community-based providers. We can't expect individuals to just walk out of a jail and be connected to those resources. It doesn't work that way. So having her to facilitate that warm handoff to those resources is imperative. So.
Heather.
If I ended up in your facility with the staff reduction, what are the odds of me actually getting the help that I would need?
Depends on how long you're going to be there. Yeah, especially with these reductions, right? We're just seeing our caseload steadily increasing. So what we do is triage. So how severe are you, right? What is your risk factors right now? Right? But really what we're doing is it's triage. So we're doing mental health triage at this point, so yeah.
And that was a grant-funded position.
It was.
So there's always the potential for the community, for us to all step up and fund these positions as well, and I think I should be on the mic. So
Yes.
These positions were all initially grant-funded, and we did hard fund a therapist position last year at the county because it was first on a grant. We recognized, hey, this is effective and it has much better outcomes, and so the grant for the case manager is coming up, and that's we're going to have to make these decisions of, are these positions that we're going to hard fund in the jail, and what other funding sources can we have? As you know, it's expensive to run a jail as it is, but obviously these are the types of things that actually change the outcome, so it's worth spending the dollars on it. But if you're looking for investing in the jail diversion master plan, I think the mental health stuff in the jail is one of the top places.
Yeah, that's exactly why I'm asking to get more detail on the impact of this, and I'm confident that we have the detailed information of the cost associated with the position. It is an investment. Were there additional questions?
Jean?
Commissioner Curtis?
So we refer to it as House Bill 33 money because that was the name of the bill the year it went through. So we've been notified that Missoula County, we should have got this money last July. We haven't yet. We've been running on a hope and a prayer. We've been notified that we will get it, but the state is still not saying what the dollar is and or when we're going to get it. So when I asked what the dollar was, they said it will be in the contract when you get it. So.
And
It's just been interesting.
And is it my understanding that they're also not necessarily clarifying what positions it is that are funded as well? Is that correct?
Right. I know they had asked Aaron some specific questions. So we're not sure. We've paid for it. We're paying the staff. We contract with Western Montana so that she has peers to work with, because we started out, it was a county position. So we'll continue with that. It is one of the things that makes a difference.
It is, and if we do, Aaron just told me, if we do get that fully funded, then we will still have the case manager. So that money was rolled into that. So we should, in theory, if we get the money, yeah. So thanks.
Which we'll know when we see the contract. Is that what you? Sounds totally logical.
We'll know last July.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Was there any other questions on services that we provide at the facility or anything like that?
Could you talk a little bit about the tool that we're using now to help with assessment?
The brief jail mental health screening?
Mm-hmm.
Sure. When an individual comes into the facility and they're being classified, every individual is given a brief jail mental health screening. Evidence-based tool that's used across the nation with individuals that are experiencing incarceration. That tool is really used to identify specific mental health symptoms, and it helps us triage individuals as well. So every individual, if they score appropriately or they're identified as having significant symptoms, are referred to our program. We then do additional screening to determine who has the highest need at that point in time, and we meet with folks based on that screening.
This is off topic of the recommendations related to this, but you also co-facilitate the Partners for Reintegration group, which is one committee of people that can help move forward jail diversion and criminal justice issues. Could you speak super briefly just about what that is and what sorts of folks that participate?
Sure. So Partners for Reintegration is a community-based coalition. Our quarterly meeting is actually right now. It's really just a group of individuals across all spectrums of both the criminal justice system, folks that have been involved in the criminal justice system, mental health providers. It's really all sorts of different folks across the community that are really interested in pushing the dial as far as how do we reduce recidivism and how do we become a more welcoming community for folks that have experienced incarceration. So we're really looking at how do we help folks that are returning from prison, right? How do we reduce that recidivism rate? We're 34% recidivism rate here in the state of Montana. And there's a lot we could be doing as a community in order to reduce that. So Partners for Reintegration is just a really great group of individuals that are actively working on things at a community level. So,
Thanks. Commissioner Curtis.
We did just get a grant also to help with housing for that. So if you think about it, somebody's in jail, they've made mistakes, probably hanging out with the wrong people. If they don't have a place to live separate from those same people, they're going to, end up back there. So we're excited about that grant. We aren't sure how, we just got notified, so we'll be working with the Human Resource Council to carry that out.
Thanks. Oh, sorry, Julie.
And I'm assuming that you guys are working with the county housing department, the city's housing department, with all the different partner agencies, and if we get to a point where we're using those funds for a halfway house type thing, that it's all an integrated project, that nobody's siloed up, correct?
So I kind of talk later, not on these specific recommendations, but yeah, about this housing and, the housing steering committee and the Fuse grant and all that I'll touch on a little bit later.
And also, we could talk about coordinated entry system as well. And certainly our program within the detention facility has been involved in the coordinated entry system. And we're seeing massive improvements as far as people not operating in silos when we're looking at identifying those that are most vulnerable, which is often the population that we're talking about right now, and how do we get them connected to housing as soon as possible. So.
We have learned to recognize coordinated entry as the magic words. Good to hear those words.
Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Did you want to talk about?
I'm back.
Where did it go?
I don't know.
Here you guys.
So actually, just very, very briefly, recommendation 4.2 that you can see on your screen talks about executing nonviolent warrants during court hours. This was really something that we started a number of years ago from the jail's perspective, just asking in cooperation with our local law enforcement agents that if they're going to execute a nonviolent warrant, particularly a misdemeanor warrant, they do so during court hours so the individual can be brought directly to the municipal court or the justice court or whichever court that's out of for appearance and bail setting prior to incarceration. The point behind that was we would sometimes get these folks at 11 o'clock in the morning on a Friday, and then they don't appear in court until Monday. It's generally a nonviolent minor warrant. They're spending plenty of time there. They're unable to afford the bail that's on the warrant, and so they're spending really an excess amount of time when getting them before the court sooner can be super helpful in getting them released. Oftentimes the judges aren't interested in detaining them. They just need to get them before the court. So this has just been a cooperative effort amongst law enforcement in the community and the jail trying to get these folks there sooner. Questions on that?
Commissioner Stromer.
So what was the impediment to getting them to the court sooner rather than later previously?
I don't know that there was a specific impediment. It was just systemically, we'd always done what we'd always done. They come to jail, we schedule them for the next available court time. There it was. Sometimes that next available court time, like I said, if it was on a Friday afternoon, wasn't until Monday. So the jail only has set times for which our defendants appear before the court. So this was just a matter of trying to get folks there quicker. It wasn't a specific barrier in place. It was just we hadn't thought about it differently. That's just the way we'd always done it. So we all get trapped in that loop.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Lieutenant Jeff Roderick. I'm the training supervisor for the facility and also the community volunteer coordinator. So since 2016, we've increased our numbers of community volunteers from 80 to 160 as of last Sunday. These people provide different services, anywhere from creative writing to yoga to AA services, Bible study groups, things like that. And we've really expanded all of our programs to offer more opportunities for all the inmates who are incarcerated. And we're continuing on moving forward. Actually, on part of Saturday, I had a conversation with some of our leaders of our community volunteers, and we're in the process of creating and the development of a life skills program where we're going to bring in community volunteers to help teach people how to fill out a job application, how to budget, just the minor things, the things we take for granted on a daily basis that these people don't know how to do, and our goal is to get that up and running this fall.
Thank you.
And then Erin Couts led the Native Outreach Project. She'll talk about that. I just wanted to briefly mention as well that we have the parenting place that comes in. Sheriff McDermott brought them in a couple years ago. They do ACEs training, Adverse Childhood Experiences, which I think you've all heard about, with the inmates, as well as some parenting classes. Again, a lot of these people have kids under 18 living at home, and when they get out, we want them to have had some support in that area.
Okay, make sure you can hear me.
Thank you, Erin.
So, once again, my name's Erin Couts, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the Native Outreach Project, which is another exciting program that we had implemented in the jail this last year. And this was made possible through funding through the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation. They partnered with the Urban Institute to implement the Innovation Fund initiative. And what this was the Innovation Fund hosted a competitive application process, and they selected 20 jurisdictions across the country to receive a package of support, including technical assistance and a small grant, to basically seed an innovative local justice reforms designed to safely reduce the jail population while maintaining or enhancing public safety. So Missoula County was one of these selected sites to receive the resources and support over a 15-month implementation period, and this spanned from January 2017 and it just ended March 2018. Missoula's innovation, which was referred to as the Native Outreach Project, focused on a three-pronged approach to address the disproportionate number of Native Americans at the Missoula County Detention Facility. Specifically, at the timing of the writing of the grant, there were 14% of inmates identified as Native American, in contrast to 3% of county residents who are Native American. So that's a pretty disproportionate number just looking at it. And at the time, it was then Under Sheriff Jason Johnson who was really curious, like, well, what's going on there? Why is that number so different? So we talked about our goal was to conduct culturally sensitive research and analysis by interviewing adults incarcerated at the jail who identify as Native American. We also wanted to implement culturally centered programming and present cultural awareness training to the jail staff. Our hope was that it would help us with future programming, knowing what works, and also reduce recidivism among this population. So we worked with two local consultants, Kevin Kickingwoman and Kathleen Littleleaf, along with Danielle Vasquez, who's also a social work practicum student. And they agreed to be the lead researchers with conducting the interviews, and then the Urban Institute provided data analysis and technical support for us. We ended up interviewing 22 Native American inmates, and from October 2017 to January 2018. And this slide above just reveals one of the interesting results of these interviews, and that's that the majority of interviewees were pretrial and were awaiting sentencing. Based on these interviews, there was a lot of interesting information that came out, but anyway, this is just a snapshot. So based on these interviews, the technical assistance team came up with some recommendations for Missoula to be used in future work, and we had a presentation on that a couple weeks ago, which I know Michelle was at, and Cole and some other folks. So in addition to the interviews, Kevin and Kathy facilitated weekly Wellbriety groups. Sorry, I feel like I'm cutting in and out. Weekly Wellbriety groups and two other short-term culturally based groups, Regaining the Warrior and Mending Broken Hearts. Regaining the Warrior is a series designed for men to help reclaim their role and identity in relation to their family, community, and their traditional way of life. And that was open to any male inmate. You didn't have to be Native American. It was open to all of them. It was just culturally based. And then Mending Broken Hearts addresses grief, loss, and trauma from a cultural perspective, in particular addressing unresolved grief and intergenerational trauma. The Wellbriety groups were initiated in September of 2017 and continued until the end of March 2018. These groups encourage sobriety through connection to culture and overall well-being. And this was also open to all inmates. They were done on a weekly basis, and the feedback was overwhelmingly positive and supportive. Lastly, a cultural training was presented to all the jail staff in February of 2018, and the training addressed basic education on Montana tribes, an overview of historical trauma and how this affects Native American culture and identity today. And So overall, this project gave us some good recommendations for moving forward. The jail was great to work with on this and was very supportive. And I think that's pretty much it on that.
At what point, Aaron, do you envision us checking in on the efficacy of various components in this?
Well, so this was basically more of like a research project, so we didn't necessarily, I mean, we did implement some programming, and we are hoping to have that. The programming was definitely found to be pretty successful.
Okay. So
we're going to look at ways to try to continue that. Yeah, it definitely meant a lot to the inmates to have culturally specific programming in the jail. So we're looking at that right now.
Is there another question? No. And let the record show Ms. West is here.
Thanks.
And I know we're running short on time, so maybe we can try to go through things more briefly. Jordan, do you want to come up real quick and talk about emergency detention? And these were funded by HB 33 as well. We built these, but Jordan's going to tell you what they are.
All right, so I'm Jordan Kilby. I'm a deputy county attorney. I work for the Missoula County Attorney's Office, and up until recently, my responsibility was to handle any of the involuntary commitments to the state hospital. So if someone is suffering from a serious mental illness and that mental illness is causing them to be an imminent threat to themselves, suicidal with a plan, or an imminent threat to others, or unable to meet their basic needs in the community, then the state can step in and require them to do treatment, whether they want to or not. And their due process rights attach at that time, and so we have to prove to the judge that they are an imminent threat to others, that it is, or themselves, that it is caused by a mental illness. And so that's why we have an attorney in the county who handles that. They have a right to a public defender, and to an attorney and a public defender is appointed. But so when a mental health professional has made a determination that someone meets criteria for commitment, they don't immediately go to the state hospital. The law requires that they are detained until their hearing in the least restrictive placement possible. And so these emergency detention beds, which the county helped fund at Dakota Place, is where a lot of people will go. They will be either diverted from the jail. If someone commits a crime and is arrested or taken to the hospital, they will go from the hospital after an evaluation to one of these beds. There are also emergency detention beds at the Providence Center. They have, I think, 6 ICU beds, and so they will take people as well. Is there anything else that you...
Heather.
How can you tell? Jordan, sorry. I was just trying to figure out how to phrase this into a question. So of those involuntary commitments, what kind of recidivism do you see in those individuals coming back into the system? Because if they don't want to get the treatment, what happens with them? Do we see them again repeatedly?
We do, yeah. We see the same people over and over, and unfortunately, they go to the state hospital. They're stabilized, and then we have a problem with treatment in the community, and as well as people wanting to continue to take their medications. There are awful side effects with psychiatric medications, and so people oftentimes go off of them, and then they end up deteriorating back to the point where our office becomes involved, unfortunately.
Follow-up. So in a perfect world, if you had unlimited dollars, what would you do differently to prevent that?
Well, exactly. I mean, I brought some numbers from just this year. Case management was cut, as we all know, and in 2015, year to yesterday, April 17th, our office filed 70 petitions. In 2016, it was 59. 17, it was 69. And as of this year, it's 90. And so I think it is more than a coincidence that case management was cut, and we have filed so many more petitions. I would fund case management and help people stay in the community. As you know, case managers make sure people have access to medication, housing, therapy, and without that, I just think we are going to trend towards more institutionalization, unfortunately. So it's depressing.
Thank you. In the interest of time, I'll skip over the rest of these. You can read them. The reentry assistance is what Jean was talking about. We got the Montana Board of Crime Control grant for $143,000. We'll be having a reentry case manager and housing navigator and some rental assistance funds with that. So we'll see some effect from that. 4 recommendations talk about the correctional services provision of them and having that be more transparent and and providing funding for it. You can read about that in the narrative, and I'm happy to talk more if people have questions. And then support legislative efforts was a recommendation out of the Sentencing Commission. There were several bills this legislative session, and there were a lot of others. This is a great article that I can put up on the jail diversion website that summarizes the legislative efforts in 2017. Did anyone have any specific questions? Because Landy's much more interesting, so.
Okay, I'm going to try and talk as fast as Cola.
Good luck.
That's impressive. So I think one of the things that I just want to summarize real quick too is that when we talked about the sequential intercept mapping, I was a part of that, and that was really great to see that it's a lot of stakeholders. There's a lot of different places to come into contact and have an influence on those who are incarcerated. And with your courts of lower jurisdiction, your municipal court and your justice courts, we see so many defendants and that's where they start. And so understanding that we have a unique opportunity to involve people and be able to divert them in different ways, and what that takes is support in a couple of different areas. And then also understanding the balance of the 3-tier balance, the judiciary, the legislative, and the executive committee, and that's always interesting, and how we balance telling judges what to do and how to do that. So we get a little ornery about that. But some of the things that we have done, I have recently written a grant for an evidence or best practice DUI treatment court. That was one of the recommendations. I think that's important given the alcohol use that is in our community. I'm hoping to hear word that grant will be awarded. That would start in October. Prioritizing court dates for jail defendants. That was a recommendation, and I can tell you that municipal court holds jail court 6 days a week, so they do see them quickly. Justice court, we hold court every weekday of the week. I've taken a look at what that would require if we did weekend court. That comes at a great expense given the amount of people that we are incarcerating on those charges. So that has not happening right now. With regards to community service, all the courts allow community service in lieu of fines. The rate was set at $10 an hour for the work for credit towards community service. Through a collaboration with municipal court and justice court, we increased that to $15 an hour as of April 1st. That was not an April Fool's. With regards to pretrial program, and so when we go back to those numbers and we think about the pretrial incarceration, the majority of those people who were incarcerated have pending felonies. Justice of the Peaces, Judge Anderson and myself set bail and release conditions on nearly all the felonies that come in that are charged in our community. Some may be cited or appear directly into district court, but having the tools at that time when we set having the information as we move forward to set effective and purposeful bond is important. And so the last legislative session with Senate Bill 59 mandated the Montana Supreme Court, the Office of Court Administrator, to effect a pretrial diversion project, oh my gosh, which was evidence-based, and that was partnering with the Arnold Foundation, and we are about ready. Missoula is one of the 5 pilot communities, and we're about ready to roll that out within the next month. And what that's going to use is a public safety assessment tool to help lay a numerical foundation for a level of risk and reappearance for individuals, and that will be a tool that the judges take into consideration when they're setting bond. There will always be judicial discretion, but I think as we look across the country, now if we have this evidence-based tool, because really what is bond being set for? It's for the reappearance of court and the community safety. It's not so much, it's not to be used as a punishment tool. And I don't think that we do that, but I think we can more effectively take a look at how we establish what bond and release conditions are. And that bill, Senate bill also came with some money that will be filtered into the community to help provide those pretrial supervision tools. There will be pretrial supervision officer that will be funded, and then additionally there will be some services that are provided, and we'll be taking a look at a matrix of how we see people and taking a look at the numbers of how many people fail to appear and how many people do appear. We want to maximize community safety, but also the funds that it takes to incarcerate, because that's really why we're here, about how do we divert people from jail and do it effectively without minimizing our community safety here. One of the benefits to this program, too, is there's going to be this really cool database that's going to actually send out text reminders and for people to appear in court. I can tell you that there's many times when people don't appear in court, that ends up in a warrant, and then we end up kind of clogging the system again. So, any questions on that?
Thanks.
All right.
It's really very exciting, the pretrial program. That's getting the PSA on board is a huge step forward for Missoula. I won't talk about these as much. The Fuse grant is something that the city got. I'm on the working group for it. It's those frequent utilizers of our community systems, our jail and our emergency room, that are placing a burden on our emergency responses. Generally has a permanent supportive housing component to it, and we'll also explore other pieces that might go along with that, like social detox and drop-in center. These aren't new recommendations or ideas. Obviously, our community's been talking about this for years, and got this grant to move forward. Other initiatives, you can read those. We talked about Partners for Reintegration in the Housing Steering Committee. I'm on that as well, ran by Aaron Pahan of the city. Justice Alliance for Behavioral Health is another community alliance of people all talking together and collaborating. And Jean wrote a grant for this collaborative care plan to bring all primary care providers and mental health providers and everybody together so that we can have more integrated healthcare systems. And something that came out of that is Partnership Health Center is placing a primary care provider in Western Montana Mental Health Center because a lot of people who access mental health services don't get primary care, and a lot of them die quite a bit early of preventable physical causes because they don't get primary care. So integrating those two is what she was going to talk about it, but I just talk so much faster that I'm just cutting everybody out. And here's where we're going in the future. We're going to continue to work. A lot of these are ongoing items. There were recommendations out of the outreach project. In your narrative, there are several recommendations that we put on hold for now. We don't think they're appropriate at this time. We'll continue to look at those. County Attorney's Office is working on launching the prosecution-led diversion program. Looking at a criminal justice coordinating council. We need to do more research on that. I'm going to South Carolina next week, sponsored by the National Association of Counties, to look at their coordinating council and see how that would work here. It's basically what we've been doing, but a much more formal group of people really looking at the system and across the system and working in a coordinated manner. And why are we doing all this? Again, for the appropriate populations, to reduce these key measures that keep people out of jail in order to enhance their quality of life so people can thrive and realize individual and collective potential. That's actually Missoula County's new vision statement. And one of our organizational goals is to promote a healthy, safe, and vibrant community. And that's why we are doing all of this, and I'm sorry it took so long. It's hard to go over 40 recommendations. It's a lot. So
You've done really well.
Thanks.
Yeah, Cola talked about many of the recommendations. I think there are like 36 in the plan, and she touched on 29 with the help of other people who work for the county. It makes sense that the county is a big player in this because so many people are, the city's role is just pretty minor as it pertains to municipal court. But even though it makes sense, it still doesn't have to be that way. So I think it's really, we owe a big thanks to the county, to the sheriff, and to Commissioner Raleigh for the work that they've done. We talked, like I already said, about 29 of around 35 recommendations that have seen work progress made in the past 2 years. And I don't think that that would be true if it weren't for the efforts that both the sheriff and the county commissioners have dedicated towards this. And we as a city need to be aware of them and need to do our part too. And they don't all have to be related to the recommendations. I'm working on some things like, I could go on and on about it and I won't, like the Business License Appeal Committee. There are all sorts of things that we can do to address criminal justice that will impact our jail diversion and jail stats. And as a community, we just need to keep doing them together so that we do a good job. That was my 2 cents. Thanks, Cola, for everything. And we're happy to entertain any questions.
Any questions? Julie?
So my takeaway from all this and from being on the health board is targeted case management is paramount in our community, and probably I hate to say it, the top priority for me of this list. At some point, we know there's over $700,000 worth of cuts that the state has handed down, and a lot of them affect targeted case management. We're going to have to step up and fund those positions, either temporarily or permanently. Are there going to be numbers applied to some of these objectives soon and brought to the city and said, this is the part you need to do?
No, can you do that?
I think through the health department, absolutely we can. We've already had to cut 4 visiting nurse positions, and Jean can probably speak to that as well. I think, yeah, we could definitely put numbers to that.
Jean.
So Missoula County already hosted mostly county departments that were affected by those cuts, but also some of our community partners that we provide some funding for. So Western Montana Mental Health Center, the Child Development Center, County Attorney's Office was there. And, what was great is we have an amazing community that pulls together and does stuff. We will continue that conversation. Montana is one of 5 states that funds mental health in the way that we do, which is not the best way. So there are some things to be learned. Right now, the Primary Care Association and a new association called BAM, B-H-A-M, Behavioral Health Alliance for Montana, I think is what it stands for, are applying for a Robert Wood Johnson grant to look at how do we change the way we fund things. But we are going to have community conversations. I've told them that we're plenty happy to continue that and figure out how do we do things better. There's always good things in crisis. It does make you come together and figure out how to work together. So I don't know that we have totally all the dollars together, but the return on investment for targeted case management is huge.
Got Heather and then Dave.
Just to echo your comments, what I feel like what we have is this high cost for a low quality of life for a certain percentage of our population, and we got to figure out ways to tilt that teeter-totter so that we actually have a lower cost, which I think what that targeted case management does, and it improves that quality of life.
Dave.
Yeah, thanks Cola and Michelle and everyone else, and thanks to everyone who's been picking off the various recommendations and making progress. I guess the tougher nut to crack is, and this is I think echoing other sentiments, what can we do as both Missoula City and Missoula County governments and not to overuse the metaphor, but to significantly move the needle? And is that, and to what extent are we talking financial investments to make that happen on both governing bodies part? Because I think we want to make sure that we're investing wisely and intervening early and not paying exorbitant costs when problems become acute. But at some point, it seems like sooner rather than later, we just need to bite the bullet and do what it takes to make significant change happen. I don't have an answer, but
Right, and I think that's the key, is the early intervention. They added an intercept 0 because where you can really affect people's lives is before they go to jail, right? We have to have these mental health care workers in jail because that's where they end up, but that's not the ideal place because it's a jail and because they've already landed themselves in some trouble, right? If they could get this mental health care before something significant happens in their life and they end up in jail, it's better to have that mental health care elsewhere than in the jail. And so it's all these really upstream preventative things that unfortunately that's historically where the money has been cut. And so we're paying for all of these really late in the game interventions, and we need to pay for prevention. And for a while we're going to have to pay for both, because you have to prevent it, and it takes some time to really have those downstream effects. And I don't think historically there's been the will to continue those efforts long enough to see the outcomes.
So if I could just plant one more seed. This morning I had a long conversation with Jody Daly, who was she took a new job in Yakima, but she was at the Western Montana Mental Health, and we were talking about this, and I think the thing that we all have trouble having a concept with, that somehow they've decided that 10 therapy sessions, or 12. 12 is what you need. So you look at that, and she used the word that I thought was interesting, the worried well. If we all, all of us are lucky. We have a support system. We got family, we've got probably insurance, we've got a doctor we know, those kinds of things. So, yeah, when we have a bad day or something happens in our life, 12 sessions is probably good. But for the people that are, we call it SDMI, severely, okay, say it again.
Disabling mental illness.
Severely disabled mental illness. It could be their lifetime that they need that. And for somebody to pull the number 12 out of a hat and say that's how many sessions you get, doesn't work for this population. So we're all the worried well, but we need to work on the others. So thanks.
Julie, and then I'm going to take public comment. I've some quick remarks, and we're going to move on to our next topic.
It's funny Jean brought up Jody, because I was just thinking of a conversation I had with Jody. I'd asked her last year before she left. They had done a pilot project of walk-in clinics in Billings, and they had done 2 of them. And I said, what does it cost to run a walk-in clinic? She said, $120,000 a year. And I said, wouldn't it be great if we had 2 of those? And then I threw out the idea of, wouldn't it be great to have a walk-in clinic at the new library? And so we had talked to some of those folks about making sure social services were involved at the library at some level, and in a way that wasn't stigmatizing. So, all these things are important. What I would like to see us get back to, we've already lost targeted case management. We've already seen a bump. How much money do we need to get back to where we were? Not necessarily increasing, but just to get back to where we were. We know we've lost visiting nurses at the health department, and we know that the impact is going to be immediate. It's not going to be something that trickles down. So my worry is that we're already behind the 8 ball. We're already in trouble right now, and no offense to studies, but if we have to wait for the results of a study, how much further are we going to be behind? I feel like there's a sense of urgency around this. So those are my comments.
Jesse.
I'll make this quick. Thank you very much for the presentation. So has there ever been any focus on fines and maybe how Missoula's fines compare to other cities? And fines, I definitely do attribute to recidivism and just like that point of contact. I think if we could focus on that and kind of see, because there's some studies that show all across the United States that fines tend to impact people of lower means and minorities more so than others, and they grow our jail populations for tiny things like a brake light out, for not getting the proper registration, just different things like that. If we could focus on that and how our fines and maybe what percentage of our fines make up for a specific revenue stream for certain departments, because I think that does make government kind of have a little bit of a vested interest in it and maybe be a little bit more biased. So maybe if we could focus on how we can lower that and lower the dependency on fines for revenue sources, how that would impact our jail system and maybe help the jail diversion program.
So with regards to fines, the statutes set a maximum fine amount, and then it is up to the judicial discretion of where to kind of land in there. There is what's called a bond recommendation book. There are some fees that come out of those that do support some of the court technology fee and some of the local issues. I can speak that all of the judges do a good job of waiving some fines or providing some type of incentive. Those things are out there, but that goes again into the individual judicial discretion, because we have the different levels of sending off to collections. Do we allow people to make those fines? Do people make communication with the court to stay in contact with those fines? We do give credit for time that has been served against that, but that would be up to the individual judges who take a look at what they impose. So.
Is there any public comment relative to the presentation? Okay, I want to wrap up and echo Dave's comments and others. It's an extraordinarily complex system, and I'm really encouraged by this update. I frankly didn't know what to expect today, and it's very encouraging. We're looking to make the smartest investments that we can make in an extremely complex system, and I feel really good about the work that has been done and is continuing to be done. I want to really, I know there's a ton of people to thank, but Aaron and Amy and Cheryl and all the folks that you work with, thanks so much for the good work that you do. It's, I think we probably can't begin to appreciate enough how difficult the work is, and it's so vitally important to the community. And I want to specifically thank Michelle and Cola for your leadership on all this work. So thanks to everybody. Special thanks to you folks. We're going to take a 3-minute break if you need to hit the bathroom or something. We will wrap up at 1:30, hard stop at 1:30, but let's take a brief break for folks who need to take off, and then we'll start our next topic, which is 12:56, so in case you're looking.
Use of fire, and that has shaped the landscapes of the ecosystems we know for millennia. Over the past 150 years, through the settlement era, there's been changes to the landscape from various industrial uses, be that timber, grazing. Transportation patterns have influenced the ways that fires burn on the landscape by creating breaks in the continuity of vegetation. And certainly over the past century, there's been settlement patterns that have influenced where folks live and how much at risk human populations are. Over the last century also, in response to those communities of people on the landscape, we have adopted fire suppression policies, fire management policies that have significantly altered the spatial distribution and continuity of fuels and vegetation, again affecting the ways that fires burn on the landscape. So for me, by way of introduction of the Community Wildfire Protection Plan, I just wanted to share a little bit of a personal anecdote, if you will, as far as my connection to the topic and why I think this is important for both the City of Missoula and Missoula County to jointly grapple with. So going back to the summer of 1994, which is receding into ancient history these days, I was serving as a fire crew supervisor in Oregon, Central Oregon, for the Bureau of Land Management. And on July 6th of that day, which was it was a particularly dry summer, not unlike some of what we've experienced as of late. But July 6th of that day, I received a notification that there were 14 firefighters who were killed on the slopes of Storm King Mountain in south central Colorado, 9 of whom were members of the Prineville hotshot crew from my hometown of Prineville, Oregon, where I was based. That's about half of the crew, by the way. So about a month and a half after the incident, I traveled to Glenwood Springs, Colorado, the site of the incident, both out of respect for those who perished on the slopes, but also out of some level of curiosity to see what combination of factors, fuel, weather, topography, led to a tragedy like this. So I hiked into the fatality site and was greeted by what you're seeing on the screen before you. There were 14 spikes driven into the ground with small brass tags on them labeled firefighter 1 through 14. This is number 10. And probably the most arresting image that will stick with me and has kind of emblazoned itself in my psyche as it relates to fire is that within a month and a half's period of time, right next to these temporary body markers were shoots of Gamble oak about the same height poking out of the ashes. That made me grapple with what is it that we're doing in terms of pushing the envelope of safety in some cases suppressing fires in landscapes that have burned for millennia, and in landscapes where within a month and a half's period of time you have gamble oak a few inches tall growing. What you don't see in these images, though, is down the slope from this was a subdivision. And again, kind of framing my understanding of fire and what we need to deal with as policymakers is how do land use patterns, how do the land use decisions we make not only impact the safety of those residents, but play into tactical and strategic decisions of risking the lives of our emergency responders in trying to protect values at risk in landscapes that burn. So I think that is part of the challenge before us today is from a planning standpoint, we're all pretty familiar in our review of land use plans relative to floodplains and have restrictions on where folks can build and what they can do or what they need to mitigate in those circumstances. I think we're starting to have some realization that similarly there are fire plains. There are places that people decide to live and or want to live and settle, which either require more mitigations than what we've previously assumed they need, or maybe there are, in those extreme cases, places where folks simply should not be inhabiting. And so that's squarely where zoning regulations, subdivision approval, and preparing for how do we be resilient in the face of climate change, because that certainly also is going to affect how we occupy these landscapes that burn. So in that spirit, we have an update to our community wildfire protection plan that is in the works right now. The comment period is open. This is not just a Missoula County thing. I think you can pick any number of places around the periphery of Missoula, whether it's the Rattlesnake, Grant Creek, South Hills, base of Mount Sentinel, Patty Canyon, that are susceptible to fire, and that we have a shared interest in figuring out how to address wildfire in our midst. So with that, I'll turn it over to Adrienne Beck. She's our director of our Office of Emergency Management, and she'll talk a little bit more about the Community Wildfire Protection Plan update process, and we would be happy to answer any questions and think a little bit about how we might collaborate as two governing bodies.
Thanks, Dave. Welcome, Adrienne.
Give me just a second here. So thank you, Commissioner Strohmeyer, for that introduction, and thank you for having me here today. As Dave mentioned, I'm Adrienne Beck. I'm the director for the Missoula Office of Emergency Management. We are actually a city-county department, and so when we talk about the county community wildfire protection plan, it really does include the city as well. And so, just a little bit of a history as to why we even have a community wildfire protection plan. I'll take you through a little bit of a back history, but won't belabor it. In 2003, some federal legislation kind of enabled and encouraged communities to develop these community wildfire protection plans for the express purpose of opening a dialogue with federal land managers and community stakeholders to come together to the same table to discuss the risk and hazard of wildfire and the impact to those communities. So in 2005, our office initiated the first community wildfire protection plan with the express priority of identifying areas within the community that would be the best place where we would want to put our efforts towards reducing fire hazard through fuel mitigation projects in a collaborative way with not only our state and federal partners, but also with private property owners. Since that time, that plan has been left largely untouched, and through some unique opportunities that were presented to our office and to our community as a whole, we were able to kind of initiate an update to our community wildfire protection plan in earnest, essentially following the update of the pre-disaster mitigation plan. So, a little over a year ago, I was here at the same podium, talking to you about our pre-disaster mitigation plan, which is required by FEMA for a community to have an updated plan that needs to be updated every 5 years in order to be eligible to receive federal assistance in a disaster or in an emergency. And a pre-disaster mitigation plan is a way for a community to kind of prioritize and categorize the hazards that we face relative to kind of our unique setting, as well, when we talk about our values at risk, our critical infrastructure, but also just our setting in the country, right? So in western Montana, wildfire is one of the primary hazards that we face. And so in 2017, we did that update to the community, to the pre-disaster mitigation plan. I'm trying not to talk in acronyms because that's how we always talk. So I'll stumble on them a couple times, but the pre-disaster mitigation plan, essentially for the second year in a row, and this comes as no surprise to any of us, ranked wildfire as our #1 hazard, primarily because of the incidence with which it occurs. We see wildfire in western Montana almost on an annual basis. There are very few exceptions to that where we don't have some negative impacts from wildfire in our communities, or at least with our air quality. And the severity of those impacts is primarily what pushed that to the top. So in light of that, we thought it might be an opportune time to try to update our community wildfire protection plan, which at that point was over 10 years old. There's been a significant advancement in the science that's available to identify and kind of understand the hazard. We know what the risk is. The risk is wildfire, but being able to kind of dive a little bit deeper into what that hazard is and be able to put that on a ranking scale was something that we were very interested in doing. And so that primarily is the impetus for why we wanted to do this update, is we wanted to take advantage of some of the most current science that's available to actually better understand our hazard. We know that we have a risk from wildfire, but we wanted to better understand what that hazard is and kind of the degree of hazard across our landscape. And so that, excuse me, is primarily what is new about this update. We also took the opportunity to kind of refresh our definitions and, increase our mapping capabilities and all the things that we weren't able to do 10 years ago. Why this plan is important from my office's perspective is not so much the regulatory side of things. And a community wildfire protection plan is not a regulatory document. It talks about what we should be doing and how we should be collaborating. It doesn't say we shall be doing these things. It's a way of providing us with a roadmap to get to the place where we are providing the best public health and safety, not only to our firefighters, but also to our citizens. And so the National Cohesive Strategy is, I won't go into that in great detail, but this update more closely aligns with the National Cohesive Strategy in that there are 3 main components of that. Dave touched on them a little bit, but reintroducing or restoring fire-resilient landscapes, increasing fire-adapted communities, and increasing our wildfire response and suppression capabilities. So on our webpage here, you will see we have a page dedicated kind of to the update. So you can see the 2005 plan as well as compare it kind of side by side with the 2018 plan. One of the areas that I wanted to focus in on in our limited time here was the WUI map. Primarily because I think what's important for us when we talk about how we get the community to understand, how we get the citizens to understand what their risk is, what the hazard level is, and then the appropriate actions that we want them to take is ultimately how we're going to keep them safer.
Tell everyone what WUI is.
Thank you. You caught me in an acronym. So, WUI is the Wildland Urban Interface. And in 2005, we used a standard definition of the Wildland Urban Interface, and we spatially displayed it in a standard way, which was any home or development that was within 1.5 miles of kind of contiguous vegetation was considered to be in the WUI. But we didn't differentiate that very much. And so when we go and talk to people and say, you live in the Wildland Urban Interface, sometimes it doesn't quite pass the red face test because they feel like they live in a relatively urbanized environment. And so as we scroll in here and take a look at, this is the updated Wildland Urban Interface map that is contained in the updated plan, and we zoom in on the city, you see these areas of red. And you'll see the legend over here. The Wildland Urban Interface is this yellow color, which essentially means that you are in an area that could have negative impacts from a wildfire. You are within that 1.5 mile radius of contiguous fuels that could throw embers, that could cause your home to be impacted by wildfire. Not only your home, but also your life safety could be impacted. So when we look at this red area, that is the only area in all of Missoula County that is inhabited by people and classified as not in the Wildland Urban Interface. And so I think that that's really compelling, because when we talk about wildfire hazard, people automatically assume that if I don't live amongst the trees, it's not my problem. And this map clearly is contradictory to that. When we look at the orange, that is more akin to what people identify as the Wildland Urban Interface. These are homes that are scattered amongst the trees. These are homes that are immediately adjacent to what we would classify as hazardous fuels or significant fuel cover. But I think that having this delineation of what constitutes the WUI helps us communicate the risks that our citizens face in a little bit better way, which ultimately is our goal with this plan, is how do we use this plan to better communicate and have a dialogue with the impacted citizenry so that they can take appropriate steps to protect their life and property. Questions on this map at all?
No.
All right. So the other one, and this one probably is what I think is probably the best part of this update, was being able to partner with Rocky Mountain Research Labs here in Missoula to implement world-class modeling, cutting-edge scientific applications to better, again, kind of categorize and communicate our hazard. Again, we know what the risk is. The risk is wildfire, but now diving into that a little bit deeper, we can understand where we have a higher degree of hazard than in other places, which allows us to be a little bit more hyper-focused on where we should dedicate resources, where we should try to look for funding, where we should look for partnerships between homeowners associations and the Forest Service or DNRC or the tribe. So again, when we scroll in here on the city, you can see that we have, and I guess what I want to point out here is that in western Montana, in Missoula County specifically, we start at a relatively high risk. Right, so when you see on here that we have a low risk or a moderate risk, that's relative because we're already starting at high. Okay, so in particular, when we look at the rattlesnake, this probably is not surprising to anyone, but it's the first time that we've been able to actually spatially show it, rather than just anecdotally talk about where our risks are. And this, I think, also is very helpful for the public when they look at this map and they can go out and stand on any street corner in Missoula and look around at the hillsides and see exactly where these fuel types change and correlate it right back to this map. So that really is what I wanted to show you today, because I think that really is what this update is all about, is being able to better communicate, to better understand our hazard. We already know that we have a significant risk, but better understand our hazard so that we can make better decisions to creating these fire-adapted communities. Because the paradigm for so long has always been, you know, how do we prevent wildfire? And we've spent a tremendous amount of money and a lot of effort in doing prevention efforts. And we need to continue to do prevention efforts because man-made fires are still a significant threat. However, over 70% of the fires that we face that end up negatively impacting our communities are started by lightning. And we can't prevent those. So we have to figure out how we in Western Montana and in Missoula are going to become, you know, the new buzzword is fire adapted, but how are we going to prepare for fire, not necessarily prevent it?
Thanks. I want to just confirm a few things, and I tried sending around the link and the plan to everybody on council. So comment period is closed, and I appreciate, Dave, you had made us aware of the open house that had happened. Thanks for that. And it sounds like tentatively looking at potential adoption of a plan at a public hearing on May 24th. Is that still?
That is correct. So, yeah, public comment, you know, kind of unofficially closed on the 12th of April. And that was so that we would be able to get any substantial public comment and synthesize that to determine if there was any showstoppers, if there was anything that would make us consider pulling this from kind of the timeline of adoption that we have lined out, which is for May 24th. In that time frame, we did not receive any comment that would make us think that we shouldn't proceed. In fact, all the comment that we received was complimentary in some way, shape, or form. We did receive some comments that that were more akin to the wood products industry and liking to see more of an emphasis on how that can be utilized to help reduce our overall risk. But that's really not the intention of the plan. So we will proceed at this point with recommending this for adoption to the council, to the commission on May 24th.
Got it. Dave.
Yeah, but just to be clear, certainly if folks from the council have input, we stand ready to. We're not going to circular file it if you have thoughts you want to share with us.
No, and
your mail system doesn't flag it in a special way. Yeah.
No, and thanks for that. And we are still open to receiving any comment, and we'll include it with any of the public comment that we have to date.
And I realized as I was reading off of it that you're holding a public hearing on it as well, so by definition. John.
So a couple of things. One of the things that I thought might be interesting and useful is to combine that hazard map with the structure exposure map that you have.
So that one is in.
Is there a combined map like that already?
So part of what got us here, actually, and I'll go back a little bit in history, is that we received a community CPAW, which is Community Planning for Wildfire Assistance Grant, that's a collaborative grant through Headwaters Economics over in Bozeman and the U.S. Forest Service. And the first deliverable that they provided for us was a structure density kind of analysis of all of Missoula County, but then also some projected growth over the next period of time as to where we would likely see growth. Nothing surprising there, but so those maps, yes, are contained within the plan itself, but you're asking if we should combine them? Which ones?
Well, so for instance, on page 38, there's it says source area for structure exposure, and I'm sorry, that's on page 39, but and then on page 38, there's structures exposed to wildfire. What I'm wondering is, have you married the structures that are exposed to wildfire with the hazard that is associated with that wildfire?
Oh, I see what you're saying, right? So No, not specifically. I mean, the point of this is for, hopefully for individuals to be able to go in and to take a look and to scroll into their, essentially parcel level to determine what their surrounding hazard is. I think that when we talk about the other component of this plan that is new is that, similar to the pre-disaster mitigation plan, this community wildfire protection plan update proposes to include an action plan and an action table. And so some of the recommendations in that action plan are to utilize these available maps and this available data to inform decisions about subdivision review and those types of things.
Can I follow up? So it was good to hear you talk about the sort of like the default position for hazard was high, and that I guess you go up one level from that and down potentially 2 levels from high. But I'm a little concerned about perhaps some misleading interpretation associated with like the area of Missoula, for instance, being classified as low risk. I mean, it doesn't mean there's no risk, and obviously, as you said, it's all relative, but I know that the modeling associated with the wildland part of this is incredibly robust. I had a chance to talk and actually worked with one of the folks who did a lot of this work in the past, and I think there's a high degree of confidence amongst those folks around that modeling. The breakdown, though, is that once you hit the urban area, the model assumes that urban areas don't burn, and we know that that's not true. In fact, fire would carry through parts of Missoula maybe faster than it would carry through part of the wildland. And so when we illustrate the fact that there's low hazard in places like Missoula, I think that, I don't know how else we communicate it, but that's not true. And I think part of the assumption is well, we have a fire department that can put out fires, but once that second house starts on fire, forget it. I mean, the fire department is not useful anymore. So there are significant areas of the community in many wards, Ward 1, Ward 4, Ward 5, Ward 2, there's basically almost every ward that there is connection to actual, wildland vegetation. It's not just timber, as you were saying, but it's, Mount Sentinel and Mount Jumbo and the North Hills and all of that if those places were to carry fire to the edge of the community, as I said, once that second house catches on fire, we saw an interesting presentation from Dr. Cohen about that, and I think there needs to be a way to articulate what that hazard is, to share the thinking around the fact that while this might be low probability, if it did happen, it would be catastrophic, and what the responsibility of all homeowners are in managing what they have around their house. And as Commissioner Strohmeyer said, the decision-making calculus that goes into where we approve subdivisions and where we approve building permits even. So I'm hopeful that we have serious conversations in that regard too.
Thanks for noting that, John. It makes me think of Santa Rosa immediately. So, Julie?
So I'm reading the Headwaters insurance and wildfire document right now, and I guess from a policy perspective, do we discourage people from building in the WUI or not? And this document there's some conflicting reports in here. They're talking about data in Colorado and that their catastrophic events are not enough to discourage development. My question really is, this is an official map. It's used by insurance agencies. Can you get insurance if you build in the WUI? Can you get insurance, fire insurance? Or it looks like they're trending toward demanding more from homeowners, and insurance companies are getting more and more rigid about if you build in a known area, they're less likely to insure you. Are you getting any pushback, I guess is my question, if we allow people to continue to build in the WUI and then they come back and say, hey, I can't get fire insurance, you guys should have told me about this. How is that handled?
Well, we've not seen that to date. I mean, I think that's certainly something that we're starting to hear more of. But as you read in that Headwaters insurance report, up until very recently, insurance companies, wildfires didn't hardly even hit on their radar as far as something to be concerned about as far as their annual loss from them. I think that certainly in the last 5 years, and certainly just some of the examples that we've seen in this last season, that may change. And I don't know that we're going to see people getting their insurance policies canceled as a result of that, but there could be substantial increases to their premiums.
Heidi, and then Jane.
So I kind of wanted to follow up on the presentation we had from, I think it was Dr. Cohen, right, and marry it with yours. And obviously this has an educational component as well as, building resilient fire-wise communities. And so I was wondering if there was a place for this to actually create some sort of a document that has best practice on design, not on a landscape scale, but for homes, because it looked like Dr. Cohen had a lot of suggestions on, avoid multiple angles on your roofs and you can avoid your house catching on fire. And if there's talk of creating some sort of a best practice design for building in these WUI areas.
So a lot of that information does currently exist, and through several programs, Firewise Communities and Fire Adaptive Communities, Ready, Set, Go, all of them have kind of home setting, home siting recommendations for homes that are in the WUI, and what their focus largely has been in, if we go back to that map, that orange section of homes that are immediately adjacent to wildland fuels. And I think that when we look at subdivision regs, and certainly I would invite Andrew, Pat O'Haron had to leave, and if there are any specific questions to how the Community Wildfire Protection Plan in the past or in the future will kind of communicate with subdivision regulations, he certainly would be happy to answer those. But they reference each other, right? So when we talk about a Community Wildfire Protection Plan, it shouldn't be something that just sits on the shelf, and it shouldn't necessarily be something that is just used for community education. It helps to inform some of the decisions that we make when we think about where we're going to approve subdivisions and those kinds of things. And using that best science that's available, if we recognize that a proposed subdivision is in a very high hazard area, there may be additional mitigation factors that would be a condition of approval, one of which may be different design components of homes.
You have the last word, Gene.
I'll talk really fast. So our subdivision regulations, because we of course see more houses in the real WUI than you folks do, does have a category so that they're, if it's a higher risk area, they have to use non-combustible materials and stuff. It ends up in the subdivision. I just wanted to talk about a little bit about, we've worked with the city fire as well as other fire to use Title III money from the Secure Rural Schools to help do fuel mitigation. Hopefully we got a little bit again, so we'll see if we get that. But the other piece is we're working on, with Fire on the Landscape, we're working with the lab to talk about how do we do more with prescribed burn to prevent wildfire. And the statistic that just sticks in your head is the particulate in a wildfire is 17 times more than in a prescribed burn. And it's because it, tends to sit there and smolder like a stinky old campfire. So that's one of the things we're working on. And then in the air quality arena, of course, last year we ended up working with Climate Smart and the health department and put HEPA filters in. But as all of us design and talk about indoor spaces in public buildings, we should be thinking more about that HEPA system. Like the new library hopefully would have that. It'd be nice if the mall did. So on those horrible days where we can't, go to the Caribbean to get away, which last year I think probably had to go that far, at least there's places where people with, elderly people with a COPD, babies can be, that you can breathe air that's not bad on your lungs.
Thanks. We're out of time, but is there any brief public comment? No? Okay. Thanks, Adrian. Thanks, everyone. Thanks very much, commissioners, for being here. We appreciate it.
Yeah.
And look forward
Next time I'll let you dominate the time.
And I'll proactively say you're welcome for the very fancy lunch we provided. So no problem. We're happy to do that. We are adjourned.